You okay, Professor?
I'm fine, yes. I mean, you might think I sound different than I do today, but it's a surface wound. But it's pleasant when you hit your head once, and then to do it twice, that's, you're having a great day. Anyway, like you go underneath a sink and you hit your head on stuff. So anyway, it's just scratch, whatever. But I know you can see it though, so I don't want you like, what happened to him? Like, did he get in a fight? Yes, underneath the sink with. Anyway, all right. So let's get to important stuff. Things that we have coming up. So let's share the syllabus. New share. So here we are. So it's the last day of, can you see the syllabus?
Yes.
Okay, so here it is the last day of November. We have our last two topics of the semester. Today we're going to talk about power and politics. Next class we're going to talk about culture and ethics. And we have test 3, so we're getting close to the end, which is great. So that's what's going to be happening. Also a couple other business things. So that's what's ahead of us. If you were doing most everyone did, if you did extra credit, you did the part 1 and part 2 of the survey. For those very few people that are doing the research paper, you can email it to me before class is over today. So that's just for the very few that were doing the extra credit research paper to do today. And just email it to me. Also, you may have received an email about teaching evaluation. Some of you have done teaching evaluation, which is great. I'm going to set some time aside next week in class to do them, so that sometimes people forget because you're so busy and you got all these other things going on. So I'll probably set some time aside next week, like during class, where you can just click on whatever link they give you and do them during class, so that we can get as much feedback as possible. So that'll be, I'll give you some time for that. If you've already done it, that's fine. If you don't want to do it in class on next week, that's fine too. But I thought I'd just make it part of class so that we can remember to do it. I think that's it in terms of business issues. Let's go to, this is I went over this before. All the point we have all the points that we've had in class. Make sure your scores are accurate. Remember, the raw scores are just posted here. We added on points, which we went over after each of the tests. And I've already gone over this page. So, any questions before we get started? All right, so let's talk about our second to the last topic, which is power. So power is something that people care about. It's an interesting topic.
Hey!
It's kind of controversial. People have opinions about power. Some people like no thank you. Some people like, I want it. You see articles. This is from Forbes, how to get more power at work. I can show you a bunch of other articles.
She was getting on top of the rest of the stufa.
What
Can
you
you get
have
the
to start
pills?
at the end of the semester.
And make sure
I don't know. I don't know what the things are going to look like. I don't know how people are going to do on test 3, so I don't know what I don't have an average curve. So if you're asking how many points am I going to add, if you mean that as a curve, I don't know. I'll kind of I'll look and see how the class does, and then I'll adjust based on how the class does. If that answers your question, Lawrence. So, a survey was done a while ago asking people this. Do most people with power try to take advantage of people like you? And so I know the results of the survey, but I'll just ask what you think. And let's see whether or not what you say matches what this poll found. So, you tell me what your experience has been.
Bye, Henry. Get well soon.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll end polling there and share results. Thank you, because you came up with the exact same percentage as this one study did. 71% of people agreed with this statement. So, there you go. So, like it or not, power is a fact of life in organizations. And obviously we have feelings about power, that people use it to take advantage of us. So let's talk about power. And again, a lot of articles talk about it in different ways. This is a Harvard Business Review article talking about influence at work. This is a New York Times article talking about bosses who bully their employees and how it has a negative impact on loyalty and sick days and things like that. But showing a boss abusing his or her power. So let's first of all define what it is. And we'll give a simple definition, and then we'll kind of expand on it a little bit. We'll say a simple definition is that power is a capacity to influence others. So power is the ability, the capacity, whatever, to influence others. So the ability, the capacity to influence others. Simple, like, okay, the ability to influence others, that's power. But let's delve into that a little bit more deeply. So the influence others. So that means suggest that there's an other, which suggests that there's a relationship. You don't have power per se, you have power over something else. Like if you tell me you're powerful, like great, well, what can you do? Can you move that chair? Can you float in the air? Like, can you make someone do something? Like, what can you do? Like power, you have power over something. Each one power, you have to show it. Like you have power over, you can make something happen. You have to have power over something else. So it involves relationships. Your relationship with someone else, at least in the context of this class. Like the classic definition, you know this, of power is that person A has power to the extent to which he or she can get person B to do something they would normally do. A has power over B. It's about the relationship between A and B. You have power over something else. Now, does the context, the social situation matter with power? Yes. So you may be powerful at work because, I don't know, you know computers, something like that. You know some software that your company uses. And so you have power there. But if I take you out of that situation and put you on a basketball team in Long Beach, some Parks and Recreation team, do you still have expert power? Nope. I mean, we can go to the list of the most powerful people in the world. You take one of those people, put them on a desert island, and then put a survivalist on that island who maybe has no formal education at all. Who's got power on the desert island?
Maybe whoever has the best survival skills.
Right. The survivalist, like whoever he or she might be, they've got power because they have information, they have skills, and not contexts that are important. It doesn't matter whether you're a CEO or whatever. Like in that context, in that situation, that matters. Okay, so it's not as stable as you might think it is. It can change quite a bit. So we know what power is. We talked about a general definition of saying the capacity to influence others. We said, well, it involves power over something or someone, and it involves a context. You can have power in some situations and not in other situations. So we know what it is. Now, how or why it works, there are a lot of explanations for how does power work. One basic one, complex theory, but is social exchange theory. And the basic idea is that power exists, power works because of resource dependencies. So it exists, it works because of resource dependencies. So you may have power over someone because you have resources that they want, or someone has power over you because they have resources that you want. What are resources that other people have that we want that give them power over us?
Money?
Right, the most basic one is money. Like, your company, your boss has power over you because they've got money and you want it and you need it. That's a resource dependency. So, what are other resources that we want from other people besides money? So, someone mentioned authority. So, you might want authority. So, I want someone to give me the authority to be able to do what I want to be able to do. Okay, authority to make decisions. Oil on a larger scale. Can I repeat the definition again? Definition of a social exchange theory says that power exists because of resource dependencies. And we're talking about what resources we need from other people. Like, right, encouragement. We may want encouragement from someone. Approval. RESPECT. What does that mean to you? Love. Like, you might want you like someone and you want their attention. You want their time. You want their energy. And so that gives them a little bit of power over you because they have a resource that you want. It could be autonomy. So there are a lot of things that we can, a lot of resources that give power. Now, it sounds kind of familiar. Like, I do what my boss says, and my boss, because he or she can help me or hurt me. That sounds like a type of leadership. I had so much turkey on Thanksgiving, I can't remember. What type of leadership is that? Based on rewards and punishments? I can't remember. Can you? I can only remember what it sounds like. It sounds like something like transactional. Does that mean anything to anyone?
Transaction.
Oh, whew. Thank you. That's what it was. Too much turkey. I can't remember. Yes. Sorry. It's very much like transactional leadership. So let's talk about resources or things that give people power. And if you look at articles about this, you're going to see a lot of the same things discussed. So we're going to look at a very famous typology, French and Raven's 5 types of social power. Now, your book talks about these. They don't mention French and Raven, but they talk about these 5 things, and they add 2 additional ones. So we're going to cover 7 things in lecture. We didn't have any hand, though. We're going to cover 7 things in lecture. French and Raven talk about 5. We're going to add 2 more that your book does. And I mentioned it's everywhere. So here is a Forbes article. You need to know these 7 types of power if you want to succeed. And they mention, like, this is stuff that you should know, people know. So they mention French and Raven. French and Raven. And we're going to talk about legitimate power, coercive power, reward power, referent power, and they don't really get into connection power. But anyway, it's not a perfect match. But these are the types of power that we're going to talk about. Our article appeared in June this year. Let's says, we'll read this bottom part. There are lots of ways to leverage and gain power in organizations. There's reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, referent power, expert power. The stuff we're going to talk about today. So this stuff is out there. Let's talk about these types of power. May I see 3 again? Sure. Is that good, Miguel? Okay. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through these things, and then next class we're going to watch a video and see whether or not we can tie what we talk about today in with the video. So today we'll go through the academic stuff, and then next class we'll watch a video of someone who's pretty interesting, and we'll try to apply this to the video. So reward power. So what's exchanged here?
Some type of reward.
Right. So some type of reward. So you do what your boss says, and then he or she gives you money or promotions or raises, or you get a parking space, employee of the month. That sounds like something too. Something that if someone does something that you like and you want them to keep doing it, so you give them something that they like. I can't remember what that's called. Something like positive reinforcement. That sounds like something.
Positive reinforcement?
Thank you so much. Yes. And that fell under what general category of approaches to learning? Learning through making the association between events. Operant conditioning. So, the point is, I'm bringing this up because these ideas are not new. Like the stuff that we're talking about now is basically stuff we've talked about in learning and reinforcement. We're just looking at it through a different lens. That is the lens of power. All right. So reward power, and we can have little pictures here, whatever that helps. Another type of power that should be familiar from our discussion of operant conditioning is coercive power. So you have to think about this for a second. You do what someone says, why?
Because they force you.
All right, so they force you in ways, so they threaten, do it or else, right? So they'll punish you they'll hurt you in some way. I'm going to fire you, or write you up, or give you a bad letter of recommendation, or demote you, or move you laterally. Demote or move laterally. Coercive power. We saw this in the video. We're in the Challenger disaster video that we saw. We talked about finished groups and teams. Where did we see, which I think was last class, where did we see coercive power in the video?
Wouldn't it be when they were trying to in a way it was not said, but they were threatening to take away their contract?
All right, we saw a couple ways. So on a ground level, Beaujolais, remember that whistleblower, Beaujolais said, this is customer intimidation because they had the threat of losing $1 billion contract. We'll take $1 billion away. That's going to hurt your bottom line if you lose $1 billion. So we saw it on that level between NASA and Morton Phi called coercive power. Beaujolais called it customer intimidation. Where else did we see it within Morton Phi call? So did the engineers think it was safe to launch?
No.
No. And Beaujolais and Thompson tried to convince managers that no, you can't. It's going to be too cold. You can't fly below 53 degrees. And they eventually shut up. Why? What were the managers doing to them? weren't they giving them dirty looks? And they said they talked afterwards, and they said those are the types of looks that you get right before you're gonna get fired. So they shut up. That's coercive power on the part of management towards the engineers. The next one, expert power. So what's exchanged here? All right, so information, stuff that you know. I mean, you're trying to gain expert power now. You're studying accounting or finance or whatever you're studying, operations management. You're trying to develop your expertise so that you can be employed and be successful in your career and things like that. So stuff that you can, stuff that you can do, like some of you like with your hands, some of you may build stuff. You may be a master crafts person, a master craftsman, a master craftswoman. There's stuff that you can do. Okay, you might be an expert in terms of your skills. I'll give you an example. Does anyone know how to arc weld in this class?
To what?
Arc weld. It's a type of welding. No. All right. So, arc welding is not easy. And you actually can make good money if you're a good welder. Now I know this because I can't. So in high school, I took a lot of AP classes, like metal shop. There's no AP metal shop. Anyway, so I take metal shop, and what was interesting was a very odd thing happened. It was odd to me as a high school student. It's certainly odd to me now as an adult. Well, at least older adult, was that we had an arc welding session, and the teacher did something very curious. He got us started and then just left. Now, I don't know how, like, arc welding stuff is like, that's powerful stuff. Like, he left students with equipment that could possibly kill them. Like, it's serious stuff. And we as high school students thought, well, this isn't right. So, and we would go, and so this is a big shop. You know what a shop looks like. And inside the shop was an office. And we would go to his office and try to see what's going on in his office. But he taped newspaper over the windows. And so he left us with this dangerous equipment. And there are two high school kids, like two classmates of ours, that ran class in his absence because they knew how to weld. How they learned, I don't know, their parents or whatever, but they knew how to weld, so they had expert power. And they ran class in his absence. When he came out of his office, their power was gone. They were just like us. But when he went back to his office, and we're all like, we don't know how to do this, they ran class. Now, when we switched to another unit, if you take a metal shop, I'm guessing no one has, but maybe one person. But in our metal shop class, there were different units. When we moved to a different unit, they didn't have power anymore because they weren't experts. They didn't know how to do the other things that we were doing in the metal shop. So something simple like that, we saw power shift all the time. I mean, they had power over me. Like, I couldn't weld to save my life. Like, one of the worst grades I ever got in my life was in metal shop. Like, we had to do a final project. Like you do for a lot of classes, but for final project, we had to make something. And I chose to make a weight bench. You can kind of see how that worked out. I couldn't make a weight bench. Like not a boat flex. I'm not talking about something complex. I'm talking about have you been to a gym? Do you know what a basic weight bench looks like?
Yes.
Okay, so I couldn't do it. Like, I kept on blowing through the materials. And the design was horrible. Let me see if I can, those of you, I think most of you know what this stuff looks like, but I mean, my freehand drawing is horrible, so you have to be patient here. So when you're bench pressing, or so I've been told, when you're done with your repetition, you want to be able to set the weight on something, that's strong and easy to set the weight on. So what you typically see in gyms is something like, my freehand drawing is horrible, but something like this, you have the bar here, and whatever, it may be adjustable. I know, it looks like a 3-year-old's doing this. But anyway, does it look familiar? You set the bar on this, and the bar goes, Anyway, so what I did with my mechanical expertise was I got the tubing and I drilled holes in it so it was adjustable. But what I tried to do is I just got a pipe and I bisected it. And then I tried to weld it on top. Tried to do welds here. And I kept on blowing through the material, kept on ruining it. And then I had to call the teacher out from the office, and he had to help me finish. He had to do the weld for me. I couldn't even do the weld. So it's horrible. Like design, like execution is horrible. It was, and so the thing was is that I had to take it home. Like not only did I get a bad grade, like I had to show my parents because I got all this extra money from my dad to do it, and he wanted to see it, and I couldn't. He had to come and get me. Like I couldn't put it on I couldn't put the weight bench on my handlebars on my bike. Like I can't, like it's not going to work. And so he had to come pick me up. And then I told you about. I think I mentioned my dad. I mentioned my dad before. He's an anesthesiologist, so he's a doctor, and he could do like everything. Like he could. I grew up with a shop. Like with a concrete floor and a drain and torches and grinders and drills and presses and like, because he did everything. Like he built cars and raced cars and built furniture and raised waterfowl and healed the sick and whatever. He did everything. So I'm his boy. I'm supposed to know how to do this stuff. So he's like, let's see it. And he puts it on we take it in and we set it on the floor in the shop, and he notices an immediate design flaw, that the legs are not all the same length. So it shakes. And then he's like, well, let's see it. And so I'm trying to bench press, and it's shaking, and I'm trying to put the weight on this little cup here at the top. So it's horrible. And so he like, oh, that's nice. But I know that secretly he was disappointed. Because it's horrible. Like, it's not safe. So the great thing about him was that he didn't say anything about it. He just took care of it. So it disappeared. And we haven't talked about it, actually. He got his torch and just it was gone. Like, he had to do it in pieces. You couldn't, like, see the whole weight bench sitting in the trash can. But he just got his torch and just took care of it. He's anyway. So the point I want to make is this is actually related, is that he has power in some situations and not others. He knew how to do a lot of stuff. He would show up, like sometimes he would show up. He would come home and he was all dirty, which is not what you expect from a doctor. Like, why are you coming home dirty? But there would be an accident, and he would stop and try to help. And when he went there, scene of an accident before paramedics got there, like people would be there, and he'd ask people listen to what he said because he was a doctor. Okay, so in that context, he had power. But if you get a chance to play basketball with him and he asks for the ball, don't pass it to him. Can't play basketball. Yeah, he can do Ironman stuff and biathlons and stuff like that, but he can't play basketball. So some situations, power, some situations, no power. All right. Your book also, let's get rid of this stuff. This is kind of painful for me to see. Your book talks about another type of power called information power. So here it is. French and Raven don't talk about this. So they talk about reward, coercive, and expert. But your book talks about information power. And your book says if you have control of or access to information, they call that information power. So control of or access to information. So your job, you may know how stuff works. You know how stuff gets done. You know how to point people in the right direction to get resources that they need. That's powerful. You may not be an expert. You're not some sort of scientist or doctor or lawyer or whatever, but you know at work, you know how stuff gets done. You can get people access to information that they need. That's powerful. And they call that information power. Like there's a woman who works in the College of Business who's a great person, and she gets stuff done. She doesn't have a fancy title, but man, if you want something done at my job, she just picks up the phone and she just does it. Like, she's connected, she knows people, she knows who to talk to, and she gets stuff done. She's very powerful, but not a fancy title. But one of the most powerful people in the College of Business. Anyway, that's information power. The next type of power that French and Raven talk about is legitimate power. So, when you start, I don't know how you were socialized in the companies that you started working at. You learn about the hierarchy, and sometimes, you're given an organizational chart. Like, that's what I got at IBM. I got to see the org chart and kind of where I was. If you look at an organizational chart, you see, like, here's the CEO, and then here you are, like, way over here, or whatever, over here, or whatever your company is, whatever your position is, and whatever structure your company is. And you look at the lines, and it tells you, like, these are my bosses, or these are the people that have the right to tell me what to do. That's legitimate power. It's their legitimate right to tell you what to do. And you look at the organizational chart, and you look at the lines, and it says, all right, here are my bosses, and those types of things. So, why does it work? So let's delve into that. So it's kind of like, all right, that makes sense. But why does it work? So you do what your boss says only because you respect that it's your boss's right to tell you what to do. Because, like, oh, I respect that it's your right to tell me what to do. Or is there something behind that? Is there something implicit in legitimate power? So you're saying you do what your boss says because I respect that it's his or her right to tell me what to do. Or is there something implicit? Does legitimate power imply something else? Right, so it isn't explicit, it's implicit. Right, so it implies, someone said information and experience, yeah. It implies this. Legitimate power implies this. It implies, hey, they can help me, they can hurt me. They might have stuff that I need, information or knowledge. So legitimate power works, it has teeth because of this stuff. So that's why it works. That's why a lot of you do what your boss says, not because, I don't know what your boss is like, but some bosses, I'm only doing what you're telling me because you can hurt me, you can fire me, or I want money from you. Like, it's not because I respect that you have that position. It's like, well, you have that position, which means you've got this other stuff, which I care about. All right, so we've got 4 so far. Well, we've done 5. 4 that French and Raven talk about. Reward, coercive, expert, and legitimate. Information power, something your book talks about, which I'm bringing in. Questions so far?
Yes.
Great.
So reward power is obviously like just reward, but can you go over coercive power just a little bit more? I have it here in my notes.
Sure.
You said something like they can do something to hurt you or reward you?
They can demote you, fire you, yell at you, hurt you in some way.
Okay, got it. The legitimate power is just people that actually have the authority to tell you what to do.
Right. So in the hierarchy, they've got power. They've got their position. They can help you, hurt you, and they can do these other things.
Got it.
Typically seen through an organizational chart. Although some of you have probably never seen the organizational chart where you work. That's legitimate power. And if you have problems remembering legitimate power, you can just remember this. You know what that is?
Organizational chart?
No.
2. No.
No one knows? No. That's not peace out. It's too legit to quit.
Oh.
Come
Yeah.
on, people like MC Hammer. Do you not know the current music scene like I do?
Sorry, Professor. I don't listen to music.
I'm so embarrassed. Actually, it's probably good that you don't know that, but you can look it up too legit to quit. Anyway, Ken Sepsis. Well, yeah, it's not that song, but it's from the same artist. Anyway, you can look it up. All right. The last type of power, the fifth one they talk about, is one that's the most ambiguous. It's the hardest to define, but we've already seen a great example of it. They call it referent power. Your book differentiates between referent power and charismatic power. I don't care about the difference. So French and Raven talk about referent power. They kind of talk about this as the same thing. So your book differentiates referent power from charismatic power. I don't care that you do. For the purposes of this class, it's the same thing, referent power and charismatic power. So again, you don't need to know the difference between these two things. Who did we see that had referent power in this class? Someone had referent or charismatic power.
Wouldn't that be you right now?
It certainly would not be me. I mean, I have some other types of power, but certainly not this. Who did we see in class? What video did we see?
You're talking about
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King. So there's someone who has, they would say, who has referent power, charismatic power. So it's someone that you admire, you respect, you want to be like them, maybe a role model. I don't know who role models have been for you. I mean, maybe it's a parent or a grandparent or, I don't know, a boss that you had. I know for me, when I worked at IBM, this is not the organizational chart for IBM, but the main person for whom our boss was Pat Dyer. She was head of testing and selection at IBM. She'd done it for 25 years, a famous woman in industry, blue ribbon EEOC committees and things like that. She's like iconic woman. And working for her, she had three managers, Laura, Malcolm, and Karen, which were all great managers. I really like working for these people. And for Pat. Imagine another manager here. And then we were underneath here. So I worked for these three managers, and then in case I didn't work for Pat directly, but this is the hierarchy. And so I had three managers, and one manager, Laura, was different from the others. They were all great. But Laura she had reference power. She was kind of like a role model for me. She was an executive at a young age. She knew, I just got my master's degree and went to work there, and she knew more about the research literature than I did, just leaving academia with a master's degree. She knew, obviously, industry better. She dressed perfectly. Her presentations were perfect. Like, she was a 10 on everything. So she had a big impact on me and on several people who worked for her. So she was different from the other managers. She was kind of like a role model. They were all great managers. Like, I really liked who I worked for. But for me and several other people, she had something different. She had referent power, charismatic power. All right, whatever. We didn't worship or anything like that, but you get the idea. So in the handouts, if you're interested, I have scales to measure your self-perceived power. And you can see if you're weak, moderate, or strong. And then a pretty well-known book on leadership talks about power and leadership, and then gives some suggestions on how to increase and maintain power. So this stuff that you'll see in your handout is just, I'm not going to test you on it. This is just if you care. And I don't really want to answer those questions. So that's in the handout for today's class if you're interested. It's just extra stuff. The last thing I want to talk about before we talk about your book is how to categorize these things. So, your book in the first part of the chapter talks about formal individual power, which is legitimate reward coercive information. Some books call this an organizational source. Your book calls it formal individual power. So if we take all the power we talked about, those 7 types of power that we talked about, and we put them into a broader category, they say, well, the first 4 stem from the organization. Your position gives you this. If you leave work, these things are gone. You don't take this stuff with you. It stems from your position at work. So some people call this an organizational source. Your book calls it formal individual power. There's other types of power that we talked about. The last 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it, are expert and charismatic, and we can put /reference. This is what you take with you. When you leave your job, you take the stuff you know. You take who you are, right? Your vision and your rhetorical skills and all that stuff. That's stuff that you take with you. The stuff that makes you charismatic or have reference power. So if you look at articles that are out there, they're going to talk about formal and informal power. Now, how they define them is slightly different, and not everything you see in articles is going to fit neatly into these categories, but we're going to see these things talked about. So here's a way to categorize power, which I think should make sense. Are there questions about this categorization?
No.
And again, there are articles. This is you can read this in your handout. How to gain power at work when you have none. The Wall Street Journal, which is something that I think a lot of us encounter when we first start working. And you can read this, or at least the part that I included, it talks about the importance of informal power. It says, you're not going to have, you have nothing, like in the org chart, you're not going to have much because you're low, you typically when you start, but informal power is really important. So it talks about that. This is an HBO article that I came across yesterday, talking about informal power is important in the workplace, really important. And a lot of people talk about the importance of informal power in today's workplace. Anyway, so these concepts and ideas are out there. There were no, what were the 2 last, we went over 5 types of social power plus 2. So here's the 5 types, and the 2 that we added that your book includes, which are not part of French and Raven, are information power and charismatic power. All right, now let's talk about your book. We have half an hour, and so we'll have to go through. Let's go to the syllabus, and I know some of you want to do this, so let's talk about this now. We have talked about the job design chapter. So let's talk about teams. Teams is 3 chapters. So let's see, which is kind of heavy. So let's deal with the team stuff right now. Let's go to chapter 10. All right, chapter 10, page 280. Exhibit 10.1. So that's just showing basic vocabulary. So you should know the basic types of groups and teams. And then give you a question and ask you, is that a task force? Is it a friendship group? Is it a self-managed team? That's basic vocabulary. That's page 280, exhibit 10.1. Page 281, exhibit 10.2. Of course, Tuckman's 5-stage model of group and team development. We went over that in class. So you should know that. On page 282, the 3rd paragraph down. The paragraph that starts the five-stage forming, storming, that paragraph, you should know that paragraph. Because what that paragraph is going to talk about is the model by Connie Gersick, which is punctuated equilibrium, which is another model we talked about in class. Excuse me. So, third paragraph on page 282. Let's see. Page 287. Social facilitation. So sometimes having people watch you when you work helps, sometimes it hurts. That section talks about when it helps and when it hurts. That's 287. Let's see what else jumps out at me. Page 291. Why do group members conform to norms? Page 291. Why do group members conform to norms? Let's see, page 292, the section that begins the pros and cons of conformity and deviance. That section until the top of 296 you can skip. So the section that begins, we'll cut out a little bit there. Pros and cons of conformity and deviance. Until the top part of 296 you can cut out. Let's look at 296. What we need to know on 296 begins with the section entitled Socialization, how group members learn roles, rules, and norms. We need to know that section there on that page. On 296.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Professor?
On page 296, what we need to know is a section entitled Socialization, how group members learn roles, rules, and norms. It's in bold blue letters on 296. 297 until the end of the chapter, you don't need to know. So 297 until the end, you do not need to know. Which is only a few pages, but it actually has a lot of content. So we'll cut that part out. Okay.
Sorry, Professor, what did you say about 297?
I said from 297 until the end of the chapter, you do not need to know. Does that make sense?
Got it, thank you.
Okay, sure. Chapter 11, page 309, exhibit 11.1. You should know the concepts of process gains and process losses. On 309.
Sorry, what exhibit is that?
Sure, exhibit 11.1.
Okay, thank you.
Page 313, social loafing, which is something that you hate. So you should know what social loafing is on 313, and then on 314, how to deal with it, or technically ways to reduce social loafing. That's on 314. Page 317, exhibit 11.2, 3 types of task interdependence. So it talks about pooled, sequential, and reciprocal, and those types of interdependence are talked about in your book. So 317, 318, 319, 320, that all talks about exhibit 11.2. Let's see. I would say let's let's say this. Let's say 321 until the end of the chapter. You don't need to know. So quite a bit actually. So 321 until the end of the chapter. So we cut out a little bit of 10, more of 11, and then we have just part of 15, 449 to 456. So let's go there. All right, you should know exhibit 15.4 on page 449. So page 449, exhibit 15.4, which talks about the advantages and disadvantages of group decision making. On page 451, of course, groupthink, the big famous decision-making error, infamous error. We spent time talking about it in class. We watched a video about it. 451, 452 goes over the symptoms of groupthink, which is something else we talked about in class. On 452, also something else we talked about in class, we talked about group polarization, or some people call it choice shift. On 452. And the last part of the chapter talks about group decision-making techniques. This is 454. So from 454 to 456, you need to know this information as well. It talks about traditional brainstorming, which has a lot of problems, and it talks about some alternatives to traditional brainstorming. That's on 454, 455, 456. Talks about things like the Delphi technique and nominal group technique. So we're not cutting anything out of 15, but it's only a few pages in 15, and I've highlighted what's most important. So groups and teams seems like a lot, but remember, we cut out just a little bit of 10, quite a bit of 11, and it's only part of 15, so it's not as bad as it looks. Any questions about the groups and teams? Did you say any pages between 449 and 454? Yeah, I said 449, exhibit 15.4, the stuff on 451 on groupthink, on 452 on groupthink, and group polarization. So yeah, I talked about a few things. Okay. All right, so that's kind of heavier, the groups and teams, because it's three sections there, 3 parts of a chapter, 3 chapters, only part of 15. But now things are going to get lighter because we only have half of the chapter on conflict. So let's go to page 384. All right, let's see. Let's look at 385. So you should know exhibit 13.4 on 385, the curvy linear relationship between conflict and performance. On 385, exhibit 13.4. Something we didn't have time to talk about. Are there going to be more questions? No, there's still going to be 50 questions, Jennifer. Excuse me. So something we didn't have time to talk about on page 385, the stuff that's in big orange and red letters. Sources of organizational conflict. It goes through differentiation. This is on 385, and types of differentiation. And then on 386, task relationships, scarcity of resources, in big orange letters. Orange and red letters. So know that stuff. Also on 386, it talks about Pani's model of organizational conflict. If you look at exhibit 13.5, you should recognize this exhibit because I took a picture of it and put it in our PowerPoint presentation talking about conflict, because we tied this model in with the group exercise that we did in class, which was the negotiation. And so latent conflict, perceived conflict, that stuff is talked about on 386, 387, 388, 389. That's a 390. So that model is talked about in several pages, beginning on 386. Let's go to page 393. This is an important page, 393. That top paragraph there talks about third parties that can get involved. It talks about the idea of a mediator and an arbiter or arbitrator. Also, on that page, Exhibit 13.6 on page 393, we had a model like this in lecture. And we have 5 styles. This is Exhibit 13.6 on page 393. We have 5 styles: accommodation, collaboration, compromise, avoidance, and competition, excuse me. So you should know what these 5 styles are and know how the model works. There's one interest, there's 2 axes. And so if I ask you a question that says, I don't know, Maria has high interest in achieving her goals and high interest in her partner achieving his or her goals, what conflict handling style will Maria choose? What would you say? So high interest in achieving her goals and high interest in her partner achieving his or her goals. Then Maria would choose what style?
Collaboration.
Right, collaboration. So you'd have to know, based on these axes, which are these motivations, where would I end up? Okay, so that's on 393. 394, section entitled Promoting Compromise. We've kind of talked about this already. Now, first of all, the fact that it's called Promoting Compromise is horrible. It's not about compromise at all, it's about win-win. Like, as someone who studies this stuff, like, this bothers me. But anyway, your book's good in some areas, not in others. It's not about this. The section is not about compromise at all. It's about integrative win-win stuff. Now, why do I say that? Because if you look at those big orange letters. So the second set says, focus on the problem, not on people. Focus on interest, not demand. Create opportunities for joint gain. Focus on what's fair. Those 4 recommendations sound a lot like the 4 key recommendations from what best-selling book on negotiation? We talked about it in class. Getting to...
Yes.
Yes. So, Fisher and Urey use slightly different words in their book, but that's essentially getting to yes, and that's about win-win. It's not about compromising. Compromising is cutting something in half. Like, that's the whole point of their book. Anyway, whatever. The vocabulary on 395, it talks about distributed bargaining, which we already know what that is. We talked about it. And it talks about attitudinal structuring. So you might know that on page 395. Now, remember also that we talked about a lot of stuff in lecture that's not in your book, so make sure that you know that stuff. Now, why? Because you only had half of a chapter on conflict and negotiation. So I augmented that with some extra stuff. So make sure that you know that, the stuff we talked about in lecture. Power and Politics is the first part of the chapter. 14 pages from 370 to 384. So let's go there now, page 370. Now this stuff is easy because it's basic stuff. Let's look at page 373. Exhibit 13.1. So there's what we talked about today. So we look at Exhibit 13.1 on page 373. We see formal power, legitimate, reward, coercive, and information. We talked about that today. That's the last thing we talked about, that categorization. And then informal power. Some people call it personal sources. Expert, referent, and charismatic. Remember, referent and charismatic we're calling the same. That's what we talked about today, essentially. The rest of the beginning pages are just about that. You look at page 374. It just defines the stuff we talked about today. It talks about what formal individual power is. It talks about legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, information power. So this is all stuff we talked about today. Page 376, informal individual power. It talks about expert power, and then referent and charismatic power. Talked about that today. One thing we didn't have time to talk about that you should know, because I'm going to add some stuff that's not in your book next class, not too much, but some, because you only have half of a chapter on power. Anyway, you should know Exhibit 13.2 on page 377. Exhibit 13.2 on page 377. And know what those things mean, like know what irreplaceability is and centrality, those types of things. Begins on 377. Also, Exhibit 13.3 on 380. Know ways that you can get more power. So tactics for increasing individual power. On page 380, Exhibit 13.3. And that takes us to, that's it. Because the rest of the chapter is on conflict, which we've already gone over. So we've talked about everything that's on test 3. Well, we talked about job design already. We talked about teams. We just did that. We talked about conflict. We talked about power and politics. We don't have time to do culture and ethics today, but that's the only thing left we have to talk about in terms of preparation for test number 3. I know there are 10 minutes left, but there's a couple other things I want to go over. So any questions about the stuff we've gone over today? And let me appear in the screen here.
Sure. Actually, can I see the slide for categories of power again?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let's share. Oh, categories of power, okay. We should add a slash referent here. Oops. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Since we were talking about points in the beginning, let me just make one other point about someone asked me about calculating grades. Let me show you an easy way. You're welcome. Let's see. So can you see this spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay. So we've had 3 tests. Each test is worth 145 points. So what you do is you take your score, whatever raw score you see on Beachboard, and you add whatever the number of points you're supposed to add. I can't remember what it was for this class. I'd have to look it up. You guys probably know. But you take the raw score that's on beach board, add the points that I said I'd be adding to this class, and then you multiply it by 2.9, and then you get the number of points out of 145. I know most of you know this, but I'm going over just in case. So we've done test 1 and test 2. We haven't done test 3. But it's whatever you get on test 3, multiply by 2.9. And you remember, test 1 and test 2, I added points to the class that are not on beach board. So that made the class average 74%, around a middle C. Scales, if you did the personality scales, are worth 25 points. Group exercise is worth 40 points, and the extra credit, which most of you did, is worth 20 points. So it's pretty simple. The calculations are pretty simple. And there's a straight scale at the end of the year. I'll probably add points at the end of the year. I'm not going to guarantee it. I don't know. I'll see how things look at the end of the year. And if I add points, it, of course, be to everyone, since everyone is the same. All right, questions?
Professor?
Yeah.
What exercises did we do? I kind of don't remember.
Okay, so we did those, the big 5 and locus of control and all that stuff. That's worth 25 points. So those personality scales that you turned in. And the group exercise is in negotiation.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? About anything?